Dude and dudettes, welcome to our most bodacious podcast. I am Scott Andrew Weatherly, and as ever, I'm joined by Julian Darius Esquire. How are you doing, Julian?
I'm most excellent. Party on, dudes.
Party on. Excellent. Right, I'm actually going to get straight. I'm going to say, if you can guess what we're talking about, you've probably seen because you'll be on the head and stuff. We are going to be talking about, a serious film, Schindler's List. No, we're talking about Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure today. A film that sort of I had to think, when did I first see this? And I can't. I think this film has just been a part of like my pop culture knowledge since I was little. So I really struggled to think of when I first saw this. But seems sort of like quite apt we're talking about this now, because obviously the latest film, the sort of the 30 years later, Bill and Ted Face the Music is recently released in the States and is releasing this week in the UK. I haven't seen it yet, but I fully intend to see it. Not sure it'll be in the cinema, but I'll be seeing it on VOD when I get the chance.
Good man.
Yes, and I can't wait, because I think the trailer for it looks ace. It looks really good fun. But yeah, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, 1988, directed by Stephen Herrick, written by Chris Matheson and Ed Solomon, starring Keanu Reeves, Alec Winters, and George Carlin. I could name the actors of all the historical figures. It doesn't seem worth it. So the story is really sort of two heavy metal sort of dropouts are about to fail history. If they fail history, they won't graduate. If they don't graduate, they're going to be separated, and one of them is going to go to Oates Military Academy, which weirdly is going to have a massive impact on the future, because 700 years into the future, the music of Bill and Ted is the basis for society and how people should all be excellent to one another. So Rufus is sent from the future to the past to help the Bill and Ted pass their history presentation. And so the boys go through history, collecting historical figures, and make a most bodacious presentation at the end. So, Julian, what are your thoughts on Bill and Ted from the offset, and where did you come across it first?
Well, I've got a lot of sort of like intro thoughts here, and hopefully we'll jump back and forth. But I first came across it because I saw it in theaters when it first came out. And I was, like 12 or something. And, it took me a little while to warm up to it. One thing that people forget is that, this movie sort of sat on the shelf. They did not want to release it. And one of the effects of that is that all the slang in it was a little old by the time it came out. So I felt like an outsider, or, I just thought like, this is all slang that I had heard, but that seemed a little out of date. And I just went along with it. I thought, I must be wrong. I warmed up to it, and, sort of loved it by the end. And I think that as a kid, it was such a sort of like insider-outsider movie. Like the fact that my parents didn't get it. They did not get the slang. They did not get this movie. It was at all. And it was such a sort of like just kind of fuck you to the establishment sort of movie that, it really resonated with me on that level. As an adult, I've come back to it over and over and am always impressed with it. And I love this movie. So what was your introduction, Scott?
Again, I'll say it's one of those that like I don't remember seeing the cinema. It was just I remember this from just being about, and I'm pretty sure it's a VHS watch first. But I also remember it being one of those sort of Saturday afternoon shows on like the BBC or whoever sort of like would show this, and it'd be one of the ones you'd check out. But I know that I'd seen it before 1990, I think it was when Bogus Journey was released, because I went to see Bogus Journey at cinema, and the Bogus Journey was one of the first CDs I bought with my own money, the soundtrack to that film. So I knew who Bill and Ted was. And again, it's one of those ones where I think I have a closer relationship to the sequel than to the first film. But when I go back and I watch this, like yourself, like there's so many things in this film that like I hadn't picked up before. That as you get older, you notice like just little jokes. I'm pretty sure would have just come about on set, and we'll pick up on a couple where it's just so well done, and Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves have got such good chemistry as a pair, as a duo. You know, like they work on that same level as sort of like Cheech and Chong or Wayne and Garth. You know, they're sort of like they just work as a duo, and so yeah, it's such a good film. It's really good fun. It is, and we'll definitely get into sort of some of the incongruities around time travel in this film. but the one thing again that sort of struck me more, having watched it the last couple of times, like you get so involved with the adventure, you know, sort of like in the fun of it and some of the jokes. But this time I was like, actually, the base message of this film is just a really positive one of like, just be excellent to each other. Like that's all it takes. Like stop being horrible. Just be excellent to each other. And it's George Carlin gives the intro to this film, which is basically sort of saying like, yeah, your world's a bit of a mess right now, but don't worry. Like, you know, all this stuff is gonna, like, you know, we're saying this a little bit just off air, but like all this is gonna work out. And you know, he's like, California in 700 years in the future is ace. Like, you know, here's all the things that are great about it. And it's interesting to sort of, for a film to have that positive message, really, especially around heavy metal music or around sort of rock music.
Yeah, I really love that positive message. And we'll come back to it. I mean, I think there are a few sequences that really drove that home and, you know, just really sell this movie. I'm always amazed watching this. I think scene for scene, moment for moment, it's about an hour and a half. Everything works. Everything is, you know, it just has that movie magic where, you know, it's edited well, the music is good, the performances are good, and everything just works. And, you know, people talk about, you know, here we are where we analyze movies, right? We have no idea, you know, like if we sat down to make a movie, it's a totally different thing. And some movies just work. But I'm constantly amazed by how nothing in this movie should work. This is absolutely a movie that should be horrible, right? I mean, first of all, they are idiot buffoons, right? I mean, that's part of my initial resistance to it, right? We've seen lots of movies of kind of like two bumbling stupid guy, you know, I mean, you mentioned Wayne's World. I think this works better, but you know, lots of movies are sort of, you know, a buddy movie where they're both dumb, right? But they're both dumb, absolutely mind-bogglingly stupid. I mean, like, you know, they're saying to their, you know, history teacher, you know, Joan of Arc is probably Noah's wife, you know, and it's a funny joke, but it's like, you know, come on, man, how, you know, there's a kind of like love of American stupidity in this that I should not be able to get past.
So there's something I want to sort of just intercede on that point, because you say about them both being stupid and they're sort of like, you know, buffoons. Something I really picked up on in this viewing, Keanu Reeves' character, I can't remember which one's Bill or Ted, but for some reason, but is definitely stupid, because throughout it, like, Alex Winter's character, and I'm going to have to check now, Alex Winter's character
is Bill.
Yeah. Keeps coming up with little gems. Like, there's a moment when two that I can think of is, in fact, three I can think is when they sort of they're cramming for revision, and they're talking about George Washington or something, and you know, Ted says about he's got you know, wooden teeth, and he's sort of obsessed with a whale, and Bill stops him and says, "No, dude, that's Moby Dick." Yeah. And you're like, oh, you know who Moby Dick is. And then later on, when they do again, they do Ted's Freud does Ted's psychoanalysis, and he says, you know, Bill, do you want to go next? He says, oh no, I've just got a slight Oedipal complex, which is a great joke considering Missy. Again, like, oh, he has an understanding of Freudian psychology, so it's like there's a part of it's like he's not as thick as I think he's pretending to be at times.
Right. I think you're right. The only caveat I'd give is that whole like performance at the end, they seem to have spent a lot of time off.
Yeah.
and learning facts about these guys.
Yeah.
So for me, like the edible complex thing, like is sort of thrown into that. Like all of a sudden they're pretty intelligent. But you're right that I mean early on there are is it Ted who says the Joan of Arc joke? I mean, yeah, I agree with you. There is a sort of difference there. But I mean, they are dumb, and they're really dumb, and they're into heavy metal music, which is not exactly my scene. I mean, I like some hard rock, but they are into a lot of this stuff. They both want to be in a band, but they never have bothered to practice. They're too dumb to use a camcorder properly. Yeah. They go through this funny catch-22 bit about like we need a video to get Eddie Van Halen to join our band to see how awesome we are, but we can't make a video until we have a band and we have some money, but we don't have I mean just the utter. And there's a line at the end like maybe we should learn how to play guitar. That's very funny, but they just are losers. I mean, they just are Beavis and Butthead. And I should not like them. I should not like them. And yet they are so likable. It is so crystal clear that they're good guys at heart, even more than like Jay and Silent Bob, they just clearly are just good guys at heart. And you fall in love with them.
Yeah, I think you're right, because that's the thing. That they're almost like innocents, aren't they? Like they're not, malicious, they're not vindictive. It's all done out of like a naivety, really, of what the real world is. Which is sort of like where I think they're good, like I say, it's their innocence, their goodness comes from. Like, the future is based on their sort of thing of be excellent to each other. And they are sort of free of any malice or bigotry or whatever, because it just doesn't cross their mind. They're like, they're not interested in it. All they want to do is like play guitars, they want to mess around with guitars and have a band. Like that's all they care about. And that's kind of nice because they're like, well, I'm not bothered by all this other stuff. I'm not gonna. But it's a really simple, positive message. But I also like the fact that when they do meet the historical figures, like that naivety and that sort of innocence comes across because they are genuinely impressed with these people, even some that are like are genuinely heinous, horrendous people. Like Genghis Khan's not someone you'd want to mess around with. Napoleon, he conquered most of Europe for a reason. Like they weren't hugely likable people, and that's something. As I said, that's one of the things that's in this film that is the Hollywoodization of the historical figures is interesting.
Yeah, they sort of take the piss out of Napoleon more than anyone, which I think is fun and works. And the Genghis Khan bits are really funny. But there's a Robot Chicken sketch, which is the end of Bill and Ted, where they're giving the presentation and it's go like, and here's the most bodacious dude, Genghis Khan, and the audience is like, he's a rapist. He murdered 6 million people. Like 70% of people in the area are still related to him because of all the rape. The movie definitely sort of Hollywoodizes this stuff. But I mean, this is another thing that so beyond the fact that this is the glorification of two douchebags, right? That like the entire future is based on these losers who want a garage band, that's their greatest aspiration in life. It was totally absurd. But then the script is like, okay, this is so dumb. If you read the script, if you were handed that script, I'm convinced you just say like, oh man, now he fell out of the suit of armor. Now, like Lincoln, they just grab him and they just grab people and throw them in. Oh, they're in the White House. They just they're kidnapping people through history. There's so many just kind of dumb decisions here. But, I mean, that's the difference between a movie that just comes off as a fun romp and knows it's making dumb decisions. It has to have that magic where you feel that sense of fun and it's not taking itself seriously. but just not taking yourself seriously isn't enough. We've both seen a million movies that don't take themselves seriously and are still miserable to watch. This is just a joy to watch. And I never for the life of me can figure out how this movie works.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're right, it shouldn't, and there was so much wrong with it. Like the fact that, if you were, like I say, and we will get into the sort of like the causal ramifications of some of the things they do, it's just like you say, they're not even the stakes of this film, like seem incredibly low. I mean, you say like they're trying to save the future, but then you're like, well, if they get separated for a summer or whatever, I'm pretty sure, like, if he goes to Oates Military Academy for a summer, like, it's not going to ruin everything, surely. And so they sort of insert this sort of thing of like they're saving the future. But then it comes to that sort of like sticky wicket of like, well, if the future already exists, then it's already been fine, right. So I'm not going to worry about it. So again, the stakes, you've seen the future. They visit the future, which actually is a really cool scene. But
yes,
if they can visit the future, then this is all going to work out. I'm not going to worry about it a great deal then. So the stakes are really low. So I don't know why I care, but I do. Like you say, I get invested in these characters because they're just, the way it's done is really good fun.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine somebody describing this movie like, okay, we want you to invest in this movie. It's about these two douchebags that want to make a band that the entire future is based on, wild stallions, and to save that utopia, it's like, glaring klaxon problem. First of all, do I want to live in a future that's based on the wild stallions? And then, you go through and it's like some of this dialogue where, you have the scene with Socrates, which plays out fine on screen, but where they're quoting lyrics to him and Socrates says on his own, like sands through the hourglass, these are the days of our lives. And I mean, you'd see that on the page and you just groan. You just say, oh, this is terrible writing. This cannot work. And yet it works and it comes off on screen and somehow, you totally go with it.
The thing is, it happens like over and over again, those things. Because basically what you're saying is, I haven't seen it for a while, but you think, like Fast Times at Ridgemont High, you're going, right, you've got two of Jeff Spicoli, you've got two of him kicking about in a time machine, kidnapping people from history. And I can't believe an exec's gone, yep, I'm down with that. That sounds like the thing the kids want. It's, it's like you say, it's whatever the pitch was that they gave for this, they sold it well.
Right, and for what? So they can get an A on their history report, right? Because that's really what the stakes are. It's not really to save this vague future, right? Where you see one room, basically, of people who strum guitar and have hologrammatic images of Bill and Ted strumming guitar. Like that's this religious sort of thing that they do. I mean, that's cool and it's clever enough, but yeah, the stakes are a couple of douchebags want to get an A on their history report because they've screwed up so much up until this point.
Yeah.
None of this should work. This is all horrible, and yet it's a joy. Well, I can't figure it out.
It is. I mean, one thing I will say is they can't play guitars. They're not particularly good at music. If they set everything up at the end, they should be looking at careers in stage management because that show that they put on at the end is ace.
I've always felt that way. Even as a kid, I was like, how did you convince these light guys? Like you're running late. You were coming in with like 10 historical figures and you're like, hold on, we got to talk to the lighting crew.
And that's what I'm like, because it's really good. And they do it in the similar thing happens in the second film. And I'm like, yeah, these guys should be running a stage production crew because they're brilliant at that. I honestly think it's the innocence. That's the only thing I can think of in this film is that although the stakes are low, it is, like you said, they should just be considered douchebags because they're losers. They've got no, they're not cool in any particular way, are they? It's not like, they're fun, but they're not like ruthless. Look, George Carlin in this film is, because I quite like George Carlin. I like his stand-up. I think he's great in some of the things he's done. he is quite cool in this. Like Rufus is a cool character. Like, you know, he's collected. He's very, you know, he is just really cool. Bill and Ted aren't. You know, they're just sort of like they're like puppies, aren't they? Sort of like they're just their level of excitement is just up here constantly, and that sort of like it's just the joy that you feel as a viewer is almost vicarious joy through them, isn't it? I mean, you mentioned the whole thing with the suit of armor when Ted falls out of it, which again is a ridiculous coincidence, but when they find the suits of armor and then they do the whole Luke, I am your father, yeah, and then fight the swords, and they're like, dude, we're total sword fighters, and sort of like, it's like just the joy of them sort of like prattling around with the swords, and so like I'm thinking, yeah, do you know what? I probably would do some if I was their age. I probably would have done something similar. I mean, fault that.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Like, you know, imagine. I mean, how do you imagine going through the script and, you know, it's just like there's a page of just Bill and Ted goofing on Star Wars, you know, which nowadays, you know, we have that stuff on like Family Guy and shows like that. This is, you know, 89. You know, I mean, you've got a page of them goofing. And meanwhile, Freud, Beethoven, Joan of Arc, Genghis Khan, Lincoln, they're all 5 of those characters are like abducted within about the span of like maybe 4 minutes.
It's a montage. It's a great
right.
Montage.
Yeah, and it's funny, but still, it's like, you know, oh really? You're more interested in Bill and Ted goofing on Star Wars, and they can't even keep the character straight. Well, they're like, you know, yay, I'm in a suit of armor, let's fight. Well, they're supposed to be undercover. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, how do you give that time and you don't give time to other things? And yet, you're right, they're innocent. You totally enjoy it.
Yeah, and I think the thing is as well, even there's one of the things I find with this film is joy. This film is about enjoyment. It's about this film's about a passion, and that's the one thing is like, yeah, history is history, and they actually make a really good point at the end of it. Like, they do learn something from meeting these people, and that's the thing. Like, they learn from the past. Like, they've actually had a lesson. They've been educated by the end of it. But when you actually meet all the characters, you know, and granted, as we say, sort of like Genghis Khan, probably not someone you want to leave running around a shopping mall, and you know, those sorts of things. But what I love about this film is the joy that every character seems to find. I mean, granted, like we talk about Genghis Khan, Billy the Kid was there's a reason he was killed at the age of 21, right? You know, let me tell you, like, he wasn't a nice person to run. He was charismatic. He was probably a psychopath, is what we're saying. These people, some of them, you know, they're not a group that should work. But I love the fact that, like, Socrates and Billy the Kid become a bit of a duo. Like, you know, they go out on the pub together to chat up some ladies, and you know, then they get interrupted by Freud. And there's a great joke there that I've never ever noticed before until this watching. When they try and chat up the 2 girls in the mall at the end. In the mall montage. And Freud, he's got a what do you call them? Like a hot dog and a stick in batter, like a I don't know what you'd call it, but he's got sort of like a corn dog. He's got a corn dog, and as he's being rejected, it flops forward, and it's just so well done. It's like, and again, I'm pretty sure someone's gone, grab that. That's a great gag for on set. And I've never noticed it before. And I was watching this time, but it just falls. And they get rejected and laughed at. Just this corn dog sort of falls forward. You're like, it's just like Freud and that sexual innuendo. It's like perfect. It's perfect. It's so well thought out for these little moments. And even like, you know, the silliness of like, I don't know when or how Beethoven became deaf. Yeah. Because they almost play it like he is deaf when they kidnap him. Like, they run up behind him because everyone else notices the phone booth arrive, and then they kidnap him and drive him off. However, later on, he's able to play multiple electric keyboards, which don't provide any vibration, so we can't read them. But again, like that moment that he's introduced to the electric keyboard by the salesman and stuff, and just the joy of him playing it, and then he's playing multiple, and it's awesome. And I'm like, this film's just full of joy. It's awesome. It's just such good fun.
No, it certainly is. I mean, one of the things that, you know, we've talked before about sort of like movies and forms of art committing to themselves, right? I mean, as a writer, you hit ideas like this where you just think, oh, this is jumping the shark. Like, I cannot do this in a script, right? And then you have to continue forward into like horrifying, uncharted territory, right? But this movie is so committed to being itself. I mean, Genghis Khan in a football uniform and a baseball bat, riding a skateboard, doing flips, beating up, office mall cops. I mean, Napoleon on water slides. I mean, Genghis. I mean, Freud analyzing Ted as part of the presentation. I mean, these are brilliant ideas, but they're zany, off the wall, risky ideas that every single one of them. You have to think as a creator, there's no way this is going to work, right? People are going to hate this. And yet it commits so fully to this.
And that's the thing is like the fact is the commitment to it as well. Because you're right. And that because the whole mall scene at the end is them just going like, you know what? We're going to go balls out. Everything's going to be crazy. Like Joan of Arc's going to knock off an aerobics instructor off a stage. And take that makes no sense to me. Like, there's other things, but it's great. It's funny to see. And again, like you say, the others, like let's say Beethoven playing and Genghis Khan, but weirdly, like Napoleon is one of my favorite characters in this because he is just an obnoxious, like he's just such a prick throughout it. But like they play it for laughs. Like from the moment they kidnap him. And he's so sort of like entitled, and then they leave him with his younger brother, Ted's younger brother, and they take him, and you have the whole Ziggy Piggy. And this is another thing, like that on script on the page that must look ridiculous, but again, the way the guy who plays Napoleon when he plays it is spot on. And again, like I'm assuming he's French because he plays it with a flawless French accent. And
not to me.
Oh, really?
Parce que je parle français, n'est-ce pas? Donc,
you would know a lot better than me. I failed French. But I love the fact they bring the ice cream, and then when it gets to the end, and he's like, the kids are all like, pristine, they've eaten nicely, and he's got like ice cream all over his face. And then he, almost like a sword fighting way, he obstructs somebody else's spoon, just the last bits, and then other things like when he's at the water park, Waterloo, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
The fact he gets at one point, like he's picking children out of the way to get up the queue and out of the way to keep going down the slides and stuff. Like he never gets better as a person or anything like that, but he's just fun to watch. Like it's just sort of again, it's zany and makes no sense, but it's committing to itself as a real sort of like romp, really.
Yeah, I mean, then don't forget Napoleon cheats at bowling, and he does it in the dumbest way possible. He just adds a 1 to his score, so he's at like a 148 instead of 48. I mean, it's so petty.
Petty. The best. Yeah, that's the best way to describe it. Yeah.
But I think it's brilliant. It does seem like that is accurate to me. It does seem, sort of, I can't help but think like of Donald Trump and the sort of like petty narcissism, of like, I'm the best at bowling, I want to win. But then I also remember myself and my brother at water parks, and we totally push kids out of the way.
Well, when you're in the queue, when everyone's running up those steps, it's fair game. When you stood still, that's a queue. Running to the queue, that's fair game. But even at the end of the presentation, when they're doing it they're playing Risk. Like he's giving them a sort of a military strategy. And Ted says like, I don't think it's going to work. So he knocks it all over with his sword, and he's like, victory. It's
Triomphe, Napoleon.
Yeah. It's just like I say, he's committing to that, and the way they do it is glorious fun. Even the fact that, like you say, because from the off, this film tells you it's going to be challenging you to sort of believe things. Because even before they've traveled through time, they're revising in their room, and you find out that Bill's dad is married to Missy, who has literally just left high school. I'm not sure how old she's supposed to be, probably about 19, 20, but both Bill and Ted asked her out to the prom at some point.
Yeah, that's so funny. I mean, I don't understand why Missy. I mean, there's a lot that I don't understand about like their life, right? Like the typical 80s movies featuring two high school kids, right? Has scenes in that high school. We see one classroom in which they say, you know, stupid shit. And then, you know, then that you see them outside the high school, but you never see that social dynamic. And then all this time is spent with, you know, this gag about you know, Missy, and she says like, you know, they're like, remember when she was a you know, she was a senior and we were a freshman. And then Ted said, remember when I asked her to the prom? You know, these are funny jokes. But, you know, the same thing with like Ted's father being a cop or Bill, you know, where you say like, was I aware of that? Did you adequately like establish this from why do we spend this time with that and with Missy? But it all works, right? I mean, you just forgive it all because it just works moment by moment.
But again, like I said, I like the fact that not only does it work on a grand scale, like because it commits to the silliness of it, like say on a micro scale, that there's little moments that they keep working. Like when they're revising, the fact that like Missy says to him, "Oh, what are you struggling with?" and they say whatever the teacher's name is, history class, and she's like, "Oh yeah, he's really tough." You're like, yeah, she was there like less than a couple of years ago, and
well, it's kind of implied that she had sex with him.
Later
kind
on,
of,
yeah, because the presentation, she sits next to him. She's like, you know, she's like, "Hello," and it's just his reaction. You're just like, "There's something." Missy seems to have worked her way through graduation in a different way.
This isn't the first older guy she's been with, and even in that earlier scene where she says, "Oh, you know," she actually says like, "Oh, well, say hi to him," you know, and there's a kind of like little suggestion in the voice.
But even so, in that first scene when they're sort of like, you know, they're told he gives Bill's dad gives him the money to say like, you know, go out. Here's like $20. Go out, and it's clear that he's about to sleep with like Missy, and he even called it out. And he's like, Ted's like, dude, he's about to like do her in your bed. And he's like, yeah, Bill, like, don't talk about it. And so, like you say, it's asking you to sort of accept that, and like, if you accept this, carry on. I love the fact that you know, to talk about the rest of the series, like it commits to that joke because in Bogus Journey, she's divorced Bill's dad and married Ted's dad.
Oh, I forgot that.
And then in the new one, I know this is no spoiler, it sort of starts and they're at the wedding, and you've seen in the trailer that Bill and Ted have been a wedding band. They're being a wedding band for Ted's younger brother. He's getting married, and he's marrying Missy.
It's clever. I mean, you know, I don't think you could quite get away with this today. You know, you know, people would focus on, you know, there's more sort of discrimination against kind of age gap relationships these days, that they're automatically abusive, which, you know, certainly there have been issues, but, you know, there's a kind of presumption now. And then secondly, making a joke. She's not really a fully fledged character at all, but making a joke of like, basically she's a slut, you know, is the joke, right? But
it comes back to this idea of, I know it sounds awful, but this idea of joy. Like, you know, it's an older guy she seems happy, like, you know, and she seems both not to be repulsed by him. It's not like one of those gags where it's sort of like younger woman's in it for the money, and she's a bit like, ugh, you know, like a Hugh Hefner kind of deal. Yeah. Like she legitimately seems to be into his dad. So I'm like, that joy, that thing of happiness seems to still be like going through. And I'm like, yeah, fine. Like find your joy.
No, you're right. And these are such weird decisions, but they come off, you know, I mean, even the sort of like running gag of like, you know, Missy, I mean, mom, you know, it's like, you know, like, you know, in real life, you know, where you have these kinds of situations, usually they don't insist on calling the older child, having the older child calling her mom, you know, but I mean, it just works. I mean, and you're right to say these are innocent decisions, but you know, as a writer, I just think like, yeah, there are implications there. I mean, how do you not hint at, I mean, there is sort of like, as the father shuts the door, you know, to have sex with Missy's kind of looking off to the side. She doesn't seem interested, but it doesn't seem fully predatory too. It doesn't seem like she doesn't want to. she seems fully committed to being their mom. You know,
well,
it's
that's the thing. It's like at no point are they portrayed as being exceptionally wealthy or that she's in it for anything. You know, there's not this. Like you say, she's bringing them milk and cookies to help them revise. Like you say, she's in it in a wholesome way. Like there's nothing.
yeah.
At no, like in a more, and I haven't seen the latest one, but if this was to have been, this film was to have been made in the last 10 to 15 years, there would have been a more sinister, darker humor there that would have had these sort of notions in some way more obvious, or that sort of a bit more sinister, a bit darker, and it just doesn't have that. It's just not there in this film, really. And the same goes for when they meet the princesses.
Yeah.
It's not like it never really comes across as lecherous or ogling. It's a bit lustful, but it's almost like puppy love. Like they see them from a distance, and it's, dude, they're beautiful. I'm in love, and they introduce themselves, and they're trying to be like chivalrous and all this other stuff, and they're not bro-ish, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Right. I mean, the princesses have always bothered me. I think the princesses are kind of a weaker part of the film, but I mean, I like that there's a little bit of the rom. I love the sort of like lines at the beginning at the Special K, where it's like, or Circle K, right? Not the drug, but where say about the princesses, but the princesses kind of, they abandoned them in the Middle Ages, right? After professing their love. And then they're just kind of like showed up at the end and they say, oh, they're going to join your band. And it works well enough. But at least there, I kind of do have a lingering thought like, oh, I mean, besides the question with all of these historical characters of like, are they portrayed in a remotely accurate way? I do sort of have the thought like, well, you were about to be, sort of forcibly married, in a sort of arranged marriage that very day. These, douchebags from the future show up and, sort of profess their love and then abandon you. And Rufus is like, nah, screw history. I guess you can't change history anyway, right? But in this movie, but you abandoned them. So I went back. Like the script had this problem. We fixed it in editing at the end. Just have them show up with Rufus at the end. Why not? And join your band. And it works well enough. But I mean, there is a sort of like, I think the way they are abandoned into an arranged marriage kind of, bothers me just a little bit.
Yeah, I think.
But it's not mean.
No, it's not. It's not, nothing this was ever really meant to mean. But you talk there about the time travel thing. About being able to change history, and I didn't study it to primer levels at this point, but there's some things like this. They try and have their cake and eat it a little bit with time travel in this film. Like people have said, I've heard things of people saying like, oh no, if time travel was real, this is exactly how it would be. This is weirdly one of the most accurate depictions of time travel. I'm like, it can't be, because even in the film, they basically do two different versions of time travel in the same film.
It's still better than most. I mean,
yeah. Well, the thing is, Rufus actually says, and again, they need the ticking clock because it's got to create tension. It says you can travel through time to any point in history, but you've got to be back in time to make your presentation. And they're like, well, we've got a time machine. He's like, no, because your time in San Dimas continues to flow.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, well, how does that work? Yeah, but then in order to sort of like to counter that, at the end of the film, during the jail heist, which I have to admit, I really do enjoy, the whole, again, prison, the bit when they're in the police station, they actually say, well, we've got to remember, because if we go back and get my dad's keys, we then leave them here behind this bush, and then they'll be here. Oh, they're here. And then they do that repeatedly with the trash can that falls on Ted's dad and this other stuff. And you think, okay, but you've just told me that time in San Dimas is running normal. You haven't got to the thing yet. So is it only your past? So is it only your past events? You have to have lived through those events in order to travel through time and different. So how's Rufus doing that? Like it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, so we've talked before about kind of like whether you take a time could be changed or a deterministic point of view. I think mostly this movie takes a deterministic point of view, and so causality isn't a problem, right? You know, do those sorts of tricks, and causality isn't a problem in a deterministic universe. But Rufus arrives, and he's like, "We've got to make sure this utopia stays intact." Well, I mean, I guess you could still say that, but it's kind of implied that something otherwise could happen, right? You know, we've got to get back in time, you know, make sure you do this. The thing that bothers me the most is that dumb thing with, you know, time continues in San Dimas. And you're right. Not only do they do the sort of like trash can thing and the keys and all of that, which is a wickedly funny, clever sequence, way ahead of its time. But also the whole going forward to the Circle K to be the characters from the beginning. Well, that means time isn't running at the same speed.
Because you've literally gone to a different time in your own timeline.
Right. You're just a few hours earlier. You clearly can go, you know, I mean, that just makes no sense. It's just a convenience of the plot. But the thing is, they don't need it. You know, like the race to get there on time, you know, I mean, you don't really need it. If you just said, well, we've got to collect these historical figures, they're running amok, you know, there's no like car chase, like, you know, ding, 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 ding. Ding, 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 Ferris Bueller, you know, car chase to get there to the school on time. And as you said, like set up the lights and everything. None of that is important. In fact, it would make better sense. All you have to change is like you need some line of dialogue to replace. Don't forget to wind your watch. By the way, how hilarious is it that we used to wind watches?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, to then talk about causality and the two things is let's say the Hollywoodization of the characters that they take. You know, there's two things I really enjoy is the guy who plays Genghis Khan. I am gonna give him a name shout. I'm gonna find him because he has appeared in pretty much everything. I'm probably gonna is Al Leong. Al Leong. There's a documentary at the moment available. It's on Amazon Prime. I think it's available through other sources, and it's just called That Henchman. And it's basically it's his career because that's what he was. Like, you know, he was in Die Hard, he was in all kinds of films. So if you needed a martial artist henchman, like Al Young was the guy you went to. And I love the fact he gets to sort of do some stuff, like some good stuff, cool stuff in this. You know, so he's really cool. But the other thing is, like I say, just I quite enjoy the Americanization or the Hollywoodization of these characters. You know, this sort of romanticized version of like Billy the Kid, Abraham Lincoln, and even like, you know, Socrates and so on. They're sort of bite size and like a McDonald's version of what the historical characters really were. Like, there's no complexity, you know what I mean? They're sort of like this is the most noble and you know, honorable version of Abraham Lincoln.
Yes.
Yeah,
and non-depressed, you know.
Yeah. This isn't sort of like your Steven Spielberg sort of Lincoln. This is Hall of Presidents, as they say.
Well, same thing. You know, Joan of Arc isn't a religious wackadoo. You know. You know, I mean, you know, she died killing people because they weren't the right kind of Christian. You know, how the hell is she going to adapt to them all? It's just like, I'll forget all of that, you know.
I kind of like that there is, like you say, you said, like, you know, are they depicted accurately? No, none of these guys are depicted accurately in the slightest. And they are, they're like the McDonald's version of historical figures. But again, that goes to the sort of like the nature of the film. But the thing as well is these historical figures clearly have been taken out of their history and are taken back. I mean, two of them, well, no, many of them actually, you are seen taken out of a populated room. So people have seen this happen, and then they're like reinserted into history. And I know we're saying it's a deterministic, future, so it doesn't really matter. But those events have no impact on history. So great.
Well, I especially think about Beethoven, like that line about like, he's a fan of Slippery When Wet, like it's so charming. It's such a cool idea. And I love the idea as a kid of like merging classical, because I came from an educated family, merging love of classical stuff and love of great literature with love of popular music, love of comic books, love of movies. But yeah, he's not going to go back and compose the same music, man.
That's it. Like, if he's listening to Slippery When Wet, like, yeah, you're not getting those same things. And the same with Socrates. Like, if he's going to sort of like, talk about, the meanings of life and philosophize on all these different things based on his experiences of living in ancient Greece. Well, yeah, but having gone to the mall and been rejected by two sort of like girls, surely that's going to start, and he's hung around with Billy the Kid. He's seen weapons, he's seen the future, like, and I don't know. It's just funny. Let's say again, you're not supposed to ask these questions. You're not supposed to sort of consider it, but making them then present in front of a bunch of. We'll get onto the presentation at the end, actually, because I this film gave me this and many others gave me a warped sense of what American high school life was. But yeah, this idea of making them do this, give a presentation in front of hundreds of people, and then popping them back into history, I'm always a bit like, surely this should have had some sort of impact.
Yeah, I wonder about that too. But I will say, like, okay, first of all, it's a fun romp, right? I mean, we don't really make farces anymore. I mean, this is a real farce. This is a farcical universe. And, we've looked at, like we talked about time bandits in the past, so to speak. But I think this comes off in a way that when you try to make a farce, it's very hard to make it come off. But I think because of that farcical nature, it's easy to forgive this stuff, even if, I can't help but kind of like, think, they're too big for those suits of armor. Like those suits of armor are a solid foot and a half too small for them in real life. I mean, weird stuff like that. What about the diseases? Stuff like that. But I will say, in its defense, I found myself thinking like, yeah, history was dumb. And I certainly think people need to study history. I'm appalled by the, American exceptionalism kind of school of, screw history and history doesn't matter, and denialism. But history was dumb, and people did a lot of dumb things, a lot of things for really dumb reasons. I love that depiction of Napoleon. I mean, was Socrates really the wisest man who ever lived? I mean, he had no germ theory of disease. I mean, the average grade school kid knows more about life and more about facts than anyone did who lived until, certainly the smartest, most informed man in 1800 knew less than a 6-year-old today. So, I mean, and Napoleon and, Billy the Kid, I mean, were these upstanding characters? So much of history is based on accidents, and I don't mean to be all like drunk history, like stupid history kind of thing, but a lot of history, I think it's important to recognize, like, Lincoln might have been a well-considered and a great man, but, I bet that if I met Lincoln, there'd be a lot of just kind of like dumb human stuff too. That, this is not a wizened sage.
No, and that's it. I mean, like you say, this isn't supposed to be a biopic. This isn't sort of Daniel Day-Lewis playing Lincoln or even Emilio Estevez playing Billy the Kid. Like, Young Guns. Young Guns is obviously a more accurate version of Billy the Kid than this is, and that's not even an accurate version of Billy the Kid, really.
No.
So,
it's not Deadwood,
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
I mean, they show prostitution. They get their heads slammed through the walls, totally Roadrunner, sort of style, right? And of course, then you think like, well, if the first one was thrown down the bar, where was the other one? Where did the other one slide down to get his head rammed through next to him? But they're looking into a whorehouse. Yeah, that's not a Deadwood whorehouse.
No.
That's just I love the line when they show up there when it says, "Oh, dude, this is just like Frontierland,"
Yeah.
and it is Frontierland for all intents and purposes.
Yeah,
the cute whorehouse.
It's more sort of like the littlest whorehouse in Texas than like you say than Deadwood or Tombstone or something like that. And I do like that though, that it is. I mean, one of the things I find interesting about this film is whoever was doing the set decoration and the costuming, like. It's weird that they've gone, right, well, the costuming is really important because we are going to be having ridiculous, farcical versions of these characters, but we don't want them to look cheap and ridiculous. So, like, the costume on Napoleon, like, is pretty accurate. Like, it looks right, the materials, even his underwear, like, he doesn't go to, when he goes to Waterloo, the theme park, like, he doesn't all of a sudden turn up in a pair of Bermuda shorts. Like, no, he's still wearing... what he would have probably worn in the early 1800s, late 1700s. And the same with Beethoven and Lincoln and Billy the Kid. The costuming in this is they've said that they wanted it to look accurate. Like, we're going to take the mick out of these characters. They're going to be ridiculous, but they've still got to look the part as much as they can do. And that sort of helps, really.
Yeah.
If they looked cheap and ridiculous and sort of like, if they looked silly and didn't look like legit, I don't think it would work as well.
Yeah, I've never thought about that, but of course you're completely right. I mean, and there is this kind of way in which it's such a sort of, Manipian farce where it's just like hard to pin down. It's so serious about itself in the costuming and getting it right. It'd be so easy to just say, what the hell are we doing here, guys? What is this movie about? Do you really care whether we get the sort of long johns right on Napoleon? Stuff like that. And sometimes I think like Billy the Kid is a little too clean, but you're quite right. I mean, they're not. That Western town looks like a Western town. I mean, at least a Hollywood version of a Western town.
Yeah, but it's not sort of, who is it that Roy Rogers? It's not sort of like, it's not sparkly shirts and playing guitars. This is closer to. But just off screen, just before we recorded, we were talking about Back to the Future 3. That same thing of acknowledging and taking the mickey out of those sort of like. 40s and 50s Western tropes that sort of went, look, and then God went away, of the tassels and the things like that. There's none of that. Like they aren't playing into that. They are playing it really sort of like, it looks like a relatively Billy the Kid comes across quite clean, but the rest of the town looks quite dirty. Like the time machine lands between two outhouses and stuff like that. Like it's it's
well, and that's a bit of a joke, right? And then you have the trope of like the bar fight, but I mean, it's fun and it works. But you're right. It's never occurred to me like if it were cheaper, if they didn't care about that stuff, you're right. Of course, it wouldn't work as well. And I don't know how they figured this out. I don't know how. I'm always just amazed. Why does this work?
Yeah.
and I think you pointed to some stuff. I mean, certainly the innocence.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things that. It's a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. Because if you do look at things in isolation, you sort of go, well, that works and that works, but like I'm not sure like how it all works. Then you put it all together and you go, oh, actually, yeah, it completely works. Like it just fits. I mean, even at one point they get stuck in history and they go to like 1 million BC. And it says on it 1 million BC. Now there must have been a temptation at some point to have a Raquel Welch looking woman run past, but they don't do that. Like they don't pander into that, but there's still that little nod of they go to 1 million BC and they break the antenna on the time machine breaks.
Well, they fix it with cans and gum,
Yeah.
and they pass out gum to get them, like, it's really important that everybody do their part and shoot, because we need a lot of
Yeah.
gum. How much gum do you have on you? I don't, it's so bizarre, but that's another sort of like, man, you gotta commit to that gag. But there's no laugh track, right? I mean, there's this weird way in which it's filled with these kinds of gags, and from these scenes, like a lot of, maybe there was a Raquel Welch joke, but that a lot of this stuff has been cut. You do have that feeling. But yeah, I mean, you got to really commit to some of these gags to even try them.
Yeah, well, even the fact that, like, and again, it didn't really dawn on me until the last probably 5-10 years in this film. I'll tell you when it dawned on me was when Doctor Who came back, and I was like, wait a minute, he travels in a police phone box, and Bill and Ted travel in a phone booth, and I was like,
I thought about that too, and I hadn't seen any Doctor Who. Maybe I had seen something, like late night. I don't know. I might have seen some already, but I never made that connection as a kid. And I saw this, if I saw Doctor Who, it was the late night, random episodes. But, not only that, but I mean, it's like, this is almost a farce. Okay, this is almost a farcical Doctor Who episode. They make a point of like everybody sticking out of the phone booth as it travels through time, which the revived Doctor Who has these like time tunnel Doctor Who traveling scenes that looked a lot more like Bill and Ted than Bill and Ted ever looked like Doctor Who. And then, so they have people sticking out of the box, and they have these comments about it full. But then at the end, it's totally clear this is a TARDIS. They all pile into it on stage. You've got like 12 people in this. It is clear that, this was a TARDIS in a previous draft or something. And then the other thing that I noted is that whole sequence, which I think was way ahead of its time, of sort of like, Dad lost his keys 2 days ago. Well, we stole it. We're going to put it behind the bush, and then there's a tape recorder and a timer to distract the dad. There's a note to themselves saying "duck," and then the trash can drops on his head. All of that is totally, the Doctor Who short, the Curse of the Fatal Death, which is Moffat's big, comedic with Rowan Atkinson. It's still one of my favorite Doctor Who things ever produced, even though it's not in continuity. And that does it as a gag too. But that was after this. Bill and Ted is, and now Moffat, of course, we've done that stuff in the revived Doctor Who. It's amazing how like much this steals from Doctor Who and how much Doctor Who stole from Bill and Ted.
But again, the fact that, like you say, before you even know that any of that's coming up, it's set up in one of the first scenes. Because Ted's dad comes in and is like, Ted, have you seen my keys? And it's like, I'm sure I had them around the house. Someone must have taken them. And Ted's like, nope, not seeing them, wasn't me. And so, and this comes to that thing we've said about deterministic future. All right, well, that means that by the start of this film, all of this has already happened.
Yes. Absolutely.
And I love that when you get to the film, like, Ted has that realization. He's like, "Oh no, I did steal my dad's keys."
Well, I like when he returns them. He sets them on the prison bars, and he says, "We found your keys." And I think, no, I discovered I will steal your keys. Is the right way to phrase it.
Yeah, but it is, that whole sort of jailbreak scene is really good. And again, you say ahead of its time, but again, it comes back to timing. Like comedy and stuff is down to timing, and in a movie, like it comes down to good actors with good timing, but also well done editing, because editing can throw it all out of a window. Like can turn the timing off massively. And I don't know how much the director was involved. I assume quite heavily in the editing, but some of the editing in this and the cuts and stuff is just so well timed. That you get just enough of like a pause, or there's just enough of a post joke moment for it to land and then to move on. That it's just, they get how comedy sort of seems to work in a lot of these situations, and they never hang on anything too long. It's never like, hey, get it, hey, get it. It's just a sort of like, it's just that thing of like the ratio of like go. Some of them don't always land, but like the hit rate is pretty high.
Yeah, and there are sequences, you mentioned why, Joan of Arc. Why is she an aerobics
Yeah,
instructor? But that actress has committed
yeah.
to it, and it's still kind of like amazing to see her going crazy there. And there are gags that, I mean, for me, the ice cream bit with Napoleon doesn't work as well. But there are gags that don't work as well. But like you say, it's just so fast paced. It's
Mm.
just on. I love that even like the I've fallen out of the armor, where Bill has watched Ted be murdered. You have watched Ted
Mm.
die. And then you have one scene where he avoids somebody coming down a hall. He goes downstairs. You have like a morning scene, not belabored.
Yeah.
It would be so easy to just milk a little emotion out of that, make that go on for another 15, 30 seconds. It's not belabored. Then you get into a fight. Ted shows up and says, "I fell out of my suit." And at that point, this is a
Yeah.
farce if you haven't figured it out. It's just like, oh, just roll with it, right? It's like the ending of Hudson Hawk, right?
Yes.
Like, no, would you believe this? Well, who cares? We've let you know this ahead of time. But I was amazed by how they did not draw that out.
Mm.
And it's, as you say, it's just like, if you don't like this little bit right here, don't worry. This will be a different movie in 30 seconds.
Yeah, and that's what I would like. It's just the pacing of it. I say it's just under 90. It's literally just under 90 minutes, I think. And the pacing of this, the hit rate is so fast. Like, you don't get a chance to sort of. And I think that's another thing is that you never, because they never, like, say, labor on a point. You don't get to either. So even if you don't like something, it's a bit like, all right, well, move on because the next bit's funny. All right, you don't like the the whole thing at Ziggy Piggy. All right, well, fine. We're gonna jump back to a whole point with Billy the Kid, or we're gonna go jump and do this. We're gonna do that. It just keeps going. And I think that's why one of the other things as well. Like, if it was even 10 to 15 minutes longer, and they stretched it would probably be sort of, you'd start to be thinking like, okay, it's some of the scenes are taking too long and they're hanging around longer than they should do and that sort of stuff. But it's not. It's just sort of like bang, 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 and it's sort of
right. Well, then part of the problem. I mean, I think you're right. I think this is such an important lesson in film, especially. If you have 30 minutes to a minute where you're just not into what's happening, you are able to ask those questions. Like, wait a minute. Is this really a deterministic universe or not? Right? Or how did Napoleon get to the Waterloo Park?
Yeah.
Why is it named Waterloo? Like, I get that's a joke, but I mean, all of these things you can kind of nitpick and sort of take apart. But as long as it's fast and you're having a good time and it knows it's a farce and it's working at that high hit rate, you don't care. And I don't care either. I mean, we're nitpicky smart guys and we don't care if it's working.
Yeah, that's it. If you're enjoying it, then you don't stop to question it. And you're right, because if I wasn't enjoying it, I would be stopping. I mean, I watched it more on this round to be a bit more like take things in, have a think about them. But for the most part, like, it's a film I can put on and enjoy. And if anything, I've watched it enough now that I can go out, make a cup of coffee, and come back, and I've missed like 5 minutes and done. I can carry on. And I'll be honest with you, I miss that. And I think this is something that sort of like the 80s, from about 85 to like early 90s, let's say 85 to 95, really, they just managed to hit this thing of like, here's a 90-minute movie and it's gonna go past like an absolute breeze. Don't worry about it. Some of it's not going to make sense, or it's going to be some of this may not work. And they just managed it. I mean, I can think of like this. They may be slightly longer, but like there's just all these films that, like, even like I said, I talked about like Commando sort of again before we walked on. Like, that film's is about 90 minutes. Action films, comedy films, all these adventure films, like they're just, now you're looking for films under 2 hours.
Well, yeah, I mean, and so many are over 3 now.
Yeah, I'm just trying to look at some here. So, Beverly Hills Cop, 1 hour 45 minutes. It's
yeah, and that's a kind of dramedy too, I mean,
Yeah.
it's got a bunch of action.
And that's it. So you know, I'm thinking of others as sort of like the 80s managed to do that because I think they realized that brevity is probably part of the key. You know, if you draw in this out, then and there were films. Don't get me wrong, there were long films. I mean, you know that. You know, I have sat through The Godfather Part 2, and other films, but they should have been long films.
Or The Deer Hunter,
Yeah.
you know. I mean, there's plenty of stuff that deserves to be long.
But what?
I mean, Dark Knight is long, but it's like packing, twice as much movie into that, 3-hour runtime, or 2:45 or whatever it is. But remember, like they used to make hour-long movies. What, like King Kong? What is King Kong? Like 60 minutes?
Just over. I think it's 70 minutes. 70, yeah, something like that. 70. Yeah. It's not long.
Well, we watched Godzilla.
Yeah, and that's not 90. That's about 80 minutes. And I'm just trying to find out. So Face the Music is 1 hour 31. So they've kept that thing like Bill and Ted's. The new one is 1 hour 31 minutes.
Yeah.
However, like you say, for some reason, action films have become just insanely bloated, ridiculous affairs that like are lasting, like I said, 2.5 hours. And it's sort of like, what? And that unfortunately leads you to the point of, I'll give you a really good example, which is probably unfair as a comparison, but Hobbs and Shaw, the Rock and Jason Statham recently, a lot of that film's really good fun. It's ridiculous, bonehead fun, but it clocks in at like 2 hours 20 minutes, and like for the last 20 minutes, even I was like. And I'm a big Rock fan, and Jason Statham. Like, this should be my bread and butter. But even that film, I'm like, oh, I'm wearing thin on this now. Like, can we wrap this up, please? Like, this is going on, and it's almost like not quite pornographic, but it's almost like self-indulgent and ego-driven now, isn't it? Like, oh, we've got to do this and this. But again, like you said, this film is a rule. It's almost like a lesson in cinema of like. No, short, punchy, funny, be done and be gone. And that's where we should be looking, really.
One of the best pieces of advice I ever got as a writer was from a professor who is unfortunately dead now, Ian McKellen, who said, if it's a good novel at 200 pages, it's a great novel at 180. And if it's a great novel at 180, it is a fantastic novel at 160. It can be the same plot. If you go through and you edit out 10% every time. Now, I have diarrhea of the mouth as a writer, so, but I think that's absolutely right. And as you say, so many of these movies that are long, I kind of feel like, it's like if we had a sequel or we had a series, we go through every permutation, right? Like there's a point at which, so-and-so is going to acquire the amulet that gives them the power, right? That's going to happen in some sequel, or that's like a little bit somewhere down the line. We're going to go through every permutation of this story within this runtime. Whereas the older philosophy, and certainly the philosophy of Bill and Ted, is like, get in, hit your gags, get out. Even if it's an action movie, get in, establish the characters, you're going to have some character scenes, whatever, but, we don't need to have 4 twists. This is not War and Peace. We don't need an epic of every twist that happens to them. Get in, tell a good movie, get out.
Yeah. I mean, the irony that our podcasts are often around 2 hours isn't lost on me as we discuss this. but it's true. I mean, well, the comedy is best when it's punchy. And the longer something sticks around, which is why sort of sitcoms, when we did Red Dwarf, they could come in, you do a 22-minute episode or a 25-minute episode, you tell your gags, you run that, you run the idea, and then you're done, and that's it. And luckily that seemed to work okay with the Promised Land, but even that was only like an hour. That was an hour and a half. But if you start to drag these things out, like it just the joke gets lost in the tedium, I think.
Well, think about, the invention of the sort of like 11, 12-minute runtime, right?
Mm.
Popularized by like Adult Swim and shows like that, right? I mean, Transformer Cyberverse is like that. You get in, you tell this wacky, story. Yeah, you can nitpick it to death. It's got a whole bunch of holes in it. But at the end of the day, it's 10 minutes.
Mm.
If you don't like it, were you really suffering that much for 10 minutes? Like, if I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure I love this new character. Well, 10 minutes, get out, on to the next kind of cool idea. Would Rick and Morty, Rick and Morty has A plot, B plot, which, I kind of hate that structure usually. But even with an A plot, B plot, it clocks in at 22 minutes.
Mm.
Can you imagine Rick and Morty working for 45?
No.
Again, comedy especially needs to be punchy, and I think that even more than punchy, because of that farcical nature, you said you can leave the room and come back and just jump right in. And it's just charming and wonderful.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Like you say, it remains charming because of that thing, because you don't have to think about it. And like you say, they're never going to get deep. They're not sort of philosophizing characters really beyond, we're nothing more than dust on the wind. But it sort of it's there just to sort of, like you say, it's there to deliver a message, have good fun, and leave. It doesn't overstay its welcome. But I think more than anything as well, like you say, because it's not cynical in any way as well. Because even a short film, if it's too cynical, whatever, like, would start to grind on you, grate on you, and that sort of thing. Or if a character was overly annoying. I think of
Solaris.
No, not really. I'm thinking of examples of characters where they've gone, that character worked in a short, works in a small compressed thing, all of a sudden gets their own spin-off or gets elevated to a main character in a follow-up or something. All of a sudden you're like, oof, they don't work as a main character. But they worked as a smaller
sidekick, or
there are examples of that, and I can't think of any right now. But
typically you don't expect those characters that work in those small increments, dotted in a larger narrative, for comic relief, or it's like, we just got through the dramatic bit, and now here's the midget character or whatever. Don't give that guy a movie on his own. That character does not need to, not because he's a midget, but because he's a comic relief or a sidekick or whatever.
Yeah, and that's the thing. In this film, I think it's that same thing of like, okay, Bill and Ted are the center of this film, but we understand that if they were slightly more bumbling, or if they were cynical in all this, then you wouldn't like them, and none of this would work.
Right. Yeah. Then it's just these really are two douchebags, right? Not just dumb douchebags, but just kind of like, although I just said I should say little person, right?
Yeah.
I should point out, it does occur to me, they're all white in this movie except for their teacher and a few people in that audience. Which, by the way, yeah, you had to give presentations, but I don't know what history class has like an auditorium filled. That's just not a typical part of American school life.
That was what sort of confused me as a kid, because I remember watching this and thinking like, I wouldn't be comfortable making presentations to my homework to the rest, not just my class, but the rest of the year, sort of like everybody else in my year, sort of. I read recently, I sort of look into some of this stuff, and originally there was a different ending, and apparently it was partly filmed where it wasn't a big auditorium, it was just a class. It was just a classroom, and it wasn't working because it was too small, because they were just leading the characters in, and it just
Right.
wasn't working. So the auditorium felt like a much, it's a bigger payoff, it's a grander payoff, and it works.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Especially with all those to like 12 characters or something, I mean, it would seem so small having, 12 old guys standing at the front of the classroom, right?
yes, yeah. So it does work, and I'm glad to report that, like, that isn't the expectation of the American education system, is that you have to and again, though, I kind of like as well that they do give you a bit of a hint, like it's not just Bill and Ted, like there's others doing it, and the others that are doing it have got varying cases for success. I like the jock, who basically clearly hasn't done very well, and sort of like, San Dimas rules,
Yeah.
end it all and gets the crowd roaring. I also there's the girl who sort of talks about Marie Antoinette and says about, well, she in them days she said about let them eat cake. Now she'd probably say let them eat fast food. And it stopped me again. I'd never thought about it before, and it stopped me and made me think this time. I was like, I think she's misunderstood the whole Marie Antoinette let them eat cake scenario. But again, I like the fact you get a glimpse of others doing their bit.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that Marie Antoinette presentation too, because I think it's sort of typical of the movie as a whole, in a sense for me. Like, obviously, America right now is not the America of 1988, 89. And now, I mean, certainly when I saw this movie as a kid, I did not have any sort of class consciousness. I did not. I had some, but I mean, I was not aware of like the wealth gap. I wasn't aware of what a problem it was of some people having no opportunity whatsoever and others, being born on third base.
Yeah.
And, that's essentially what she's talking about. And then she's talking about food, fast food and TV as sort of like distractions for the masses. Like, right. Like now we have TV. Well, damned if that isn't true. I mean, she says like, oh, it's like today how a lot of Americans don't have anything except a television. And I thought, right, that's the bread and circuses, and it is amazing how, you can be dirt poor, but you have a sound system in your car, that can play stuff, and you've got a television, and you have, streaming service. Not everybody, obviously, but most people have these things. And it is really easy to, it's like, well, yeah, I come home and want to kill myself every day. I hate my boss. Society hasn't given me any chance to get ahead. I gotta, go $5,000 a year into debt on my credit cards just to stay afloat and pay my medical bills or, raise a kid. But, I do again Netflix, like endless entertainment. So I thought, like, the thing about her presentation is I love that little bit is in there, right? There's like a little bit of, observations, but it's such a delicious blend of like dumb and smart at the same time, right? Like it's a realistically dumb high school presentation, but with a couple, like it's not a dumb girl, right? Like it's not a dumb set of observations. It's just she's 18. And I think that the movie kind of has a similar line. Like, it's fun. It hits its marks. It has a few fun observations, but it's not pretending to be, a manifesto.
No, and that's the thing as well. Like you say, and that's a really good point. Like you say, it's not trying to be a manifesto because again, like, it doesn't want to or doesn't have to explain its positive message. It comes down to we'll just be excellent to each other. There's nothing there about, okay, well, we're going to try and address social unrest and class division and racial diversity across nations and all sorts of stuff. Just be cool to each other. Like, just be a good person. And it'll work out from there. and it's sort of like that's it. And like I say, it's not trying to sort of, and this isn't to be against, like you say, social justice warriors or anything like that. Like you say, it's not. But it's that thing of like, again, this could be, if it was to be, luckily it's been the same creators, but if this was to be rebooted or remade today, there would be that need and that desire to really not, that message of just be excellent to each other would have to expand. It's sort of like, it'd be like inclusion and diversity and da da da. It's like, look, that's not what this film is. It's not trying to address and raise awareness of all the ills in the world. Like, it's a movie, it's having fun. It's just saying, just be excellent to each other. Like, that's the core of it all. Like, all this other stuff still comes back to this one thing of be a decent human being. And I think I like the fact that it's they're trying to keep to that simple message.
Yeah, I mean, I love that message too. I think today the reaction would probably be like, yeah, that's a pretty white privileged attitude, right? People have deconstructed sort of, Star Trek's sort of similar messages, and certainly, I mean, they are not poor, right? I mean, they're in San Dimas, California. Basically, everyone is white. And we're supposed to believe that, like, be excellent to each other is going to create this, utopia, which presumably is going to solve racial inequality. And, they don't make a point about it, but presumably, I mean, you see this, I think the head of the future is black. And they don't make a big deal about it. That's great. But yeah, be excellent to each other. You can tell a cop to be excellent to people and he'll still disproportionately shoot, black kids. So I think today we're more aware of that, but that doesn't mean it's not a good message. And I certainly would have no objection. I mean, you and I are not going to object to somebody who comes along and says, like, hey, I happen to be black, or I happen to feel these things about this movie. It does not speak to me. I can't get past some of these things. Hey, live and let live, right? But I do think that while not imagining that be excellent to each other, really, it is necessary but not sufficient, right? It's a farce that is going to create a wonderful world, right? It's like, Jesus said, love everybody. And then people said, yeah, got that. Let's go have a war with these guys. And nobody's going to be like, be excellent to each other. Nah, you know what? You're right. Why didn't I think of that? But it's a farce, and that's still, as you say, really a beautiful message. And, while this is not a movie about interrogating complex socioeconomic or racial problems, but it's still a beautiful message.
Well, I think it's the fact that, like with everything else in this film, it gets boiled down to a simple, get in, get out. Get in, give your message, get out. Like, be excellent to one another, party on, sort of thing. Like, but again, like, if you look at the future, to consider that, Rufus doesn't explicitly state it when he gives his overview of the future, but he says, like, no, our society is now based on the musical teachings of Bill and Ted. And they're saying that basically, like, be excellent to each other, that sort of thing. So, okay, so are we now in a post-religious world 700 years in the future where we've moved on from believing in, different deities and different religious beliefs to everybody's now unified under this one sort of, like, weirdly, under this one band? Like, and they haven't been. What's weird is they've maybe, let's say, they've been. That's almost a Christian. They've almost been given as a sainthood, but they're not. They haven't become deities. People know that they are people from history. They haven't been given some. They haven't really been elevated, other than to say, yeah, they were great musicians at some point. And so, yeah, you could look at that future and sort of see. You don't see a great deal of it, but have they then? In order for it to be great, they've taken out all the other obstacles have gone. That they've just gone down to a single philosophy rather than multiple that people can then argue over.
Right, which again, like, if you focus on too much, I mean, that is obviously, a fascist sort of state, right? I mean, all utopias, if you actually depict them, are horrifying
Yeah.
because nothing can ever change, right? Like, no, we've gotten, we're unified. Like, well, unity about freedom and diversity and tolerating other cultures and whatever is fine. But, unity of we're all like, I just, I always think like if I'm in that future, I'd be like, yeah, screw this music.
Yeah.
I don't like that. That's not my genre. And obviously there'd be very little place for that. But I do think that because they don't dwell on it, that future is oddly moving. And I think there are two. I mean, I think that's the first moment where I'm really just moved watching this, when they accidentally go to the future because the machine's malfunctioning, and they do the strumming of the hands, and there's this sort of like Peter Gabriel-esque music that's very different from the other music, and it is so oddly moving. Not just this be excellent to each other, but the sense of these two guys making it up as they go along, right? Who brave, certainly they're brave or too dumb to be scared of all of this, going into a medieval castle. But the sense of, which I certainly felt as a child, and I still feel, although now it's bittersweet. The sense of we will win. This generation, we will win, over these forces of the establishment and these dumb teachers. And, although I had a lot of teachers as friends, but I feel that same thing at the end. There's this sense of, in that big presentation, this sense of just, it's so triumphant. It's like we have faced these obstacles and now the lights dim, and, you just feel the sense of like, yeah, we suffer hardships, or difficulties. We're struggling with Missy or our families of origin or whatever it is, but that sense of, yeah, it's all going to be okay, and some sort of vision that is in tune with this younger generation is going to win out. That certainly, I believe that, and now I live in a dystopia.
Yeah. Not for long, hopefully. We'll see. But yeah, it is.
But it is moving. I mean,
yeah. Everyone filters in, and they all sort of like, they're impressed by Bill and Ted, and it is quite. I see what you mean by moving, because it's that sort of. It's almost like for the people of the future to be starstruck, isn't it? Like they are meeting their Messiah. They're sort of. Those that are the basis for their society. It's sort of, it'd be almost like a Christian meeting Jesus.
Yeah.
And, oh man, I got to meet Bill and Ted. Sort of.
Well, I love their sort of nervousness as Ted says like, dude, I think they want us to say something, and they just be excellent to each other and party on, dudes. But I'm struck watching that of sort of how much anxiety we have. And certainly I felt this as a kid. Like, we so often, we want to succeed. We want to accomplish stuff. And here they know, I mean, they feel that too, but they also know like, hey, it's going to be okay, man.
Yeah.
You will win, right? The future is going to look a lot better than the past, and you cannot make a mistake. Literally, anything you say is going to be fine. Chill out, and you'll probably say better things anyway because you're chillaxed than nervously strung out. And I do kind of love those messages.
Yeah, it's maybe then we do need a Bill and Ted kind of like, maybe it's time to face the music. Because again, like this would be what they've been like Gen X, really, the sort of the tail end of Gen X, then really, before they're sort of the millennials, and sort of that.
I think they're early Gen X. I think I'm tail end Gen X.
Okay, yeah, because they'd have been they're in their sort of mid to late teens in 88. So, yeah, so they're Gen X, so they've got this sort of positive sort of future and stuff, and it's interesting now to see how I don't know what that generation is. Those guys now, what you call them, in the sort of early teens and early 20s now, sort of, that are doing the same thing. It's sort of facing up to that next level, isn't it? Of saying like, it's, we don't know what the future's going to hold, other than, if we keep doing what we're doing, it's going to not be excellent. It's going to be horrendous, and we've got to do something about it. And that you say, that anxiety that sort of pervades everything now is like, right, well, all politicians are corrupt, so the governments of the world are all going to break us down. But don't worry about that, because we're all sort of trapped in the corporate world anyway. So all of our sort of personal information is being traded, and we are nothing more than a human commodity for these large corporations that are actually just burning their way through fossil fuels, destroying our atmosphere. So, yeah, it's basically just sort of like we're leaning into our own destruction every day. But now we are going to sort of do something about that. And as you said before, it's sort of the be excellent to each other is nice, but not enough. And this film's not supposed to be, like you say, isn't supposed to be philosophical on world politics or climate change. But
you mean I can't base my religion on Bill and Ted? I thought that was the whole point.
We haven't heard the song yet. I don't know. Band-Aid didn't do it. If Bono and that bunch couldn't do it, I'm not sure Bill and Ted could. Yeah, I don't know. It's sort of like it's well intentioned. It's a kids film. It's a fun romp, but it's fun to go back to. But I wonder if you were to show this film to kids of our age and we saw it, if they would look at it and be like, oh, yeah, you say white privilege, oh, it's all right for them, sort of thing.
Like, what the hell is this movie about?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's interesting you talking about that, because it seems to me like it's such a generational movie. I mean, this was a touchstone, and this was not supposed to be a big hit. I mean, they kept it on the shelf. And then it was a cultural milestone. Everybody saw that. It's why you mentioned, Wayne's World. It's why they go, party on, Wayne. It's because of this movie. That slang was dead when this movie came out, and it revitalized it and changed American slang. But, I think about like maybe every generation is disappointed. And now that I'm a weary old man of 82, I can sort of have this perspective that sort of, I felt like the 60s generation had sort of had its turn. The baby boomers had sort of had their turn, and they were basically, my parents' generation. And they sort of had their turn, and they failed. My parents were hippies, well, that didn't work out so well. That little love and peace, didn't work out so well. And, we had, Reagan and Michael J. Fox was, the embodiment of the 80s. And we had a kind of like, we were more cynical in the sense that you and I grew up, in an era that was much more okay with capitalism to a certain degree, and commodification to a certain degree, but not to the degree today. But I certainly saw this as a generational film. I certainly saw this. It certainly spoke to me as a kid of sort of, I don't know what our manifesto is. I don't know what we want to say. And I don't think Gen X still knows what it wants to say. We never had a hippie counterculture in that sense. We had Nirvana, we had anger, but we never had a manifesto. And I think that's interesting that this movie embodied that. We had so much certainty. I mean, we had absolute certainty that, the Reaganites, the older generation that seemed so staid, the bad education I was getting at school, some wonderful teachers. But I mean, you go to school for 8 hours a day and you basically get an hour and a half of decent education in there. And the rest is, daycare. And now it's even worse. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I wonder if you gave this to a 10-year-old, what they would make of it. They think it was hopelessly naive, Dad.
Yeah, they probably would. And as you said about history's dumb, and sort of like, I'm pretty sure there are 12-year-olds now that are way more informed and way more intelligent than ever I was ever at 12. And you mentioned then about sort of the hippies. The hippies became the yuppies. It didn't work out, so we ended up. We That's it. The free love didn't work, so I ended up sort of saving money and going to Wall Street instead. But it's the same sort of, like I say, you say about the manifesto of this era. It's interesting because you have the hippies have their counterculture, that manifesto of free love and experimentation, and even the after that, like the next generation or the next decade, you get punk coming in sort of like 77 and stuff. I can't stand punk music. It's not my thing. Like, but it had that thing of like, again, it was an angry face up to the government and anarchy, and it had a manifesto. And then like the decade, the late 80s brings us the rave culture and stuff, and it had nothing. It was just sort of like, now I'm going to get off my face. I'm going to listen to some banging tunes, and I'm going to get off my face on drugs. And you're just like, why? What statement are you trying to make? Nothing, because nothing's worth doing it about. I'm just going to enjoy the music and in the moment. And you go, oh,
yeah,
all right. I can't argue with that. And you're going to, that's the thing. It's going to, and I think that's it. It was almost like a counterculture movement that was like, I'm not going to be counterculture. I'm just going to and you can see it in the films of that time, or even later films that depict that time. 24-Hour Party People, Train Spotting, like Train Spotting tried to give it a message, sort of choose life, but it was still about basically drug culture, rather than having a real message. So yeah,
sort of Wolf of Wall Street, Party Monster,
yeah.
I mean, it's funny that like the basic premise of this movie, that like you could make a song so genius that like it just convinces everyone to put the guns down and love each other, is such a like idea from a generation earlier, right? But I mean, I loved and still love punk music. A huge fan of post-punk. And, to me, listening to, Sid Vicious say, God Save the Queen, it meant, this whole structure is going to come down. Screw that. We don't need a monarchy. Britain, doesn't need it. Screw Thatcher, screw Reagan, screw everybody, the Christian right and, the way they practice Christianity. All of that's going to topple. And, the future of Bill and Ted meant, those ideas of my generation, that was going to win. And we didn't know what was going to replace it, but that was going to win. And it's funny, I mean, as you get older, one of the things I always tell younger people is your ideas will win, but you don't know when, and you don't know in what order. So you will get gay marriage, but we have not, obviously we haven't toppled these other things. I do think that, in 20 years, those things will not be as much of a political force, just looking demographically. But, you sort of have to age to the point where you are the majority. Nobody's going to hand you power until you really are the ones with power. But I still love the movie, even though I look back on it nostalgically and with a little bittersweet feeling about this idyllic future.
But it does, and I think the thing is, like I say, it's got a simple message, but also, like I say, one of the things of this film, and maybe sort of think to wrap up on this point, is this film's teaching you to learn from history. That's the point of this film, is to say that like history is important. And these people in history, they were important people that have brought you things. Like, this is two musicians that this is probably their first introduction to Beethoven.
Beethoven.
Beethoven. In these other characters, like Socrates, they've been introduced to philosophy. They've been introduced to sort of classical music, psychoanalysis, and all these other things. Honorable politics, if that's a real term, an oxymoron. But this film is telling you to learn from history. Like I say, maybe its simple messages it hasn't aged as well in this day, in this current climate. But I do think this idea of going, look, stop, look to history, and realize that there have been great people, there has been great progress. Things do get better because let's be honest, sometimes the era is shit, but sometimes it gets better.
Well, I think that's really interesting. That I mean, I don't know how I feel about that as the sort of like thesis or the message. I do love, I'm thinking about the contrast between the opening in the classroom, the early scene where you you have them trying to convince the teacher that they shouldn't fail, and he says, you've taught me about great leaders like Socratic method, and, and he says, and he says, really, and what did I teach you? What did they tell you? And he says, well, they lived so that the world could be filled with history.
Yeah.
It's like such a dumb thing. But I definitely think like by the end you feel like, hey, whether you know anything about Socrates or any of these guys, maybe it's this doesn't apply to Genghis Khan and Napoleon, but Socrates was cool. Abraham Lincoln was cool. These guys are cool dude. Beethoven was cool. I mean, like, listen to some Beethoven. Yeah. It's part of your cultural heritage. It's part of your history. How can you not be aware of these things? So I definitely do like that.
But again, like you say, you talk about the positives there, but Genghis Khan did conquer a massive part of the Eastern world, and yeah, like you say, unfortunately, or not unfortunately, but his DNA is still tracking through an awful lot of people in parts of the world because of his willingness to spread his seed, shall we say, whether wanted or not. He wasn't a great person, but he is still a massive, part of history. And the same for Napoleon. Like, this idea that this person can come out of nothing, like literally, like Napoleon in many ways is almost that sort of, I say the American dream. He comes out of nothing to rule an empire. Doesn't mean he was a great person or anything, and he comes to us.
Well, by today's standards, right? I mean, nobody at the time said, Genghis Khan, we don't want to do this anymore. Yeah. I mean, this was just established. This was just normal at the time. That doesn't mean it's okay. That doesn't mean we have to think it's okay. But, Napoleon, I mean, there's still French people who look back on Napoleon. And you're right. I mean, it was the American dream, right? I mean, he came from nothing. It was merit that he rose by much more than in the past, which is incidentally the same thing I feel about Cromwell. For all of his failings, he came up through the ranks. That wasn't something that was possible before. When you had, it was a generation earlier, you just say like, oh, well, the Earl of Sussex, he's not so bright, but he has to command the army. Like, what are you talking about?
It is true. I mean, if you look at Napoleon, he does come to an end. He is defeated and he has to go into exile. Fine, the good guys win in the end of it because he was invading these other countries. But when you look at like who he was fighting against, he was representative of the people. Like, he may have lost touch over time, but he like I say, he rose through merit. Wellington didn't particularly. Arthur Wellesley, Duke of Wellington, didn't. He sort of bought a lot of his commissions, and yes, he was a good general, but like some of that wasn't. The Prince of Orange, the Prince of Belgium, was a complete bloody disaster, leading his armies during the Napoleonic Wars, and often had to sort of be sidelined so that his generals would stop him from making decisions. So yeah. He may not have. He's on the wrong side of history. Is I would say a better way of doing it. Like I couldn't speak to how he treated his people or other things, but is there a side of history that says actually he was he really liked knitting and he's actually I don't know.
Maybe that'll be in the next bullet. The knitting years. Well, I mean, even Joan of Arc, right? I mean, she, I mean, there's, you look at her accomplishments and you say, why is this, why is war this great accomplishment? And especially in Europe, internecine wars, what a detriment to all of Europe. But men listen to her.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about a feminist icon, she no matter what she said about gender, which, people wouldn't agree with today, nonetheless, you can't imagine at that time an entire army of men listening to her. So, I mean, history is fraught. History is difficult. For me, what I come back to, though, is, it just works moment by moment as a film. And there's so many times so many great moments where I just think, this is just working fantastically. Where even just a line makes me laugh. I think one of the first ones is, Ted saying, "Bill, strange things are afoot at the Circle K." Like, I mean, which is not, I don't know why that's funny. It's just the absurdity of, like, a sort of 7-Eleven sort of environment and having, it's just hanging a light on how utterly absurd all of this is. And lines like, "Excuse me, sir, do you know where there are any personages of historical significance around here?" Just wonderful lines and wonderful moments that just live with
me.
They
do have, it is incredibly quotable in that way, because I do like the fact that when they are at the Circle K and they've asked some guy about, they've already got some information on, I forget what it is now, and then they ask some woman as she walks past, "When did the Mongols rule China?" Like, I don't know. I just work here.
Well, this is another thing I thought about, like, generations, right? Like, if you gave this to a 10-year-old, they'd say, why don't they ask their cell phone?
Yeah.
The idea that like, it seems quasi-reasonable to me, having grown up in that time, that you might, having been expelled from your house so your dad can have sex with, Missy, that you might just hang out at the 7-Eleven or the, the Circle K and ask random strangers, since you don't.
Yeah, it is. Let's say that's the thing as well, isn't it? Like, say, does it work as in a we've said this before about technology and stuff, but dating a film. But I think the guys work. Again, I said, to bring it back to that, like, Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves just work as a pairing in that same way. We've talked of others like, Cheech and Chong, Bill and Ted, Wayne and Garth, Jay and Silent Bob. Like, though they are there as just that duo. It's almost like a trope in itself, really. But yeah, no, I would definitely put them up there. So
yeah, I agree. And I was going to say that I love the ending. The ending is even more punchy than the beginning, and I love that it acknowledges that, he says nothing's different. It's like, okay, so, like, we're supposed to change the world. We won, the history thing, but, like, it's not like my dad loves me now. It's not like, we still don't know how to play guitars. And I love this sort of, maybe we should start learning how to play. And then, Rufus shows up, and I love, it's a silly thing, Rufus jams, right? And then, Rufus breaks the fourth wall right at the last moment, and says, they do get better.
Yeah.
And, you just it's so good. And it's just punchy to the end. It acknowledges this sort of, like, problem with the denouement where you always think, well, things aren't really okay now, right? So it gives, this wonderful little denouement scene that manages to acknowledge that, yet be punchy and funny and clever, and what a ride.
Yeah, and that's it. And it's a romp, and that's the thing, like you say. If anything, things end up worse, because they've now got to house 2 illegal immigrants that have got no ID. So that's an interesting one.
We've got some cages over here.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not sure if English. They're white, so they're probably not as endangered if they were somewhere from another part of Europe.
Yes, this is sadly true.
Yeah.
Uh,
But yeah, I think we've covered pretty much everything, and I have to say I agree. I really enjoy this film. I love I'm looking forward to Face the Music and sort of how they sort of try and round this out. But it just works as a sort of if this had never had a follow up or anything like that, it works. It's really good fun. You can just buy into the, like I say, to the farcical comedy of it and just enjoy the ride. It's like a roller coaster, isn't it? Like you accept the universe for what it is and you enjoy the ride, and it takes you up and down and round, and then you get up at the end and you go, "That's really good fun. That was. I think I'll jump on again that some other time."
it's a water park, basically. It's just a water slide.
Water slide is what it is. Yeah. So, what are your final thoughts on Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure?
Dude, I feel the same way, bro. Yeah, I mean it's just great fun, and I think that I can't. I'm a fan of farces, but this is in that rare 90+% of it works sort of category where so many movies done by ostensibly great writers, smart people, great artists don't work at this level. And I agree, it's just minute by minute, so much of it works. It stands up. It's still fun. I can't say enough good about it. I think it's a classic, and I think that it's sort of perceived too much as like a kind of cult movie. I think it is just, a really good farce and a really good sort of sci-fi farce. And yeah, it had a cult following because it wasn't sort of recognized by, nobody working at the Atlantic was going to say, you must check out Bill and Ted. But over time, it's achieved that sort of status. And I think it has merited it, much like Napoleon and Cromwell.
No, I agree. I think it feels like an underdog that's sort of like, it's, and I'm hoping really, because it's one of those films that I think, like you say, is generational. I think there's a generation of people sort of probably over 30 that know this film well, can recite it, and you can say things like Ziggy Piggy, and they'll know what you're talking about. Anyone younger than that, probably not. And I'm really hoping that Face the Music, sort of like people will go see it, and they're going to meet characters in that, like they're going to meet Missy and Bill and Ted's dad, and his younger brother, and even from the second film, they're going to meet Death and Station and all these other odd, bizarre characters, and they're going to go, "What the fuck is this? Where do I?" And they're going to go back, and hopefully they'll go back and they will watch, Excellent Adventure and Bogus Journey, because I think they both really deserve to be seen, and especially in an era where there's been a Keanu sense, if you want to go with that. Everyone knows him as John Wick. Well, yeah, I like the John Wick films, but he was him and Alex went above Bill and Ted way before that, and that's how I know him. So, yeah, I'm glad we sort of did this. It's not a good sort of touch point for me.
It is for me too, and I'd rather have another Bill and Ted, whether it's great, than I like John Wick fine, but I think these are more interesting movies.
We said about being brevity, right? It's that thing again. That first film, the first John Wick film, is it's relatively short. It's punchy. It plays out well. Doesn't overstay its welcome. Leaves. They have got longer and longer since, and
they're all part of this ongoing epic now, right? Where it's like, okay, it ends with a cliffhanger that nothing that happened in this movie is going to make sense really until you watch the next one, and so I guess we're 3 in, and 4 is going to come out. Whereas, even, like Bogus Journey, you like more than I do. I feel like it doesn't hit its marks. It isn't minute for minute, just punchy, and it doesn't work at this rate, even though there's stuff that I love, right? Death is wonderful. I love the Seventh Seal stuff. But, I mean, we haven't even mentioned, whether the animated show is in continuity.
We may have to come back
The
to
answer
that.
is no.
Well, let's say, there's been comic series and all kinds of things, so it has sort of had all that stuff. But yeah,
Well,
no.
I hope people check it out and rethink it, because this is, for as much, it's great to have a sequel after 30 years, but I think the movie still holds up and is underrated and kind of still a lost gem compared to how often it's cited among especially sci-fi comedies throughout history. This is right up there with anything else.
I agree. It's just been released on 4K, so that it's the opportunity to see it in its best possible format now. Right. Well, we'll sort of wrap up that. But next, we're going to go. I was going to say we're going to go into outer space. We're not. Outer space is coming to us. Next week, in the next episode, it's an attack. It's going to be Mars Attacks. Tim Burton's Mars Attacks, based on a trading card. Game from, I think, the 50s and the 60s. Generated some comic books and things. Became a movie in the 90s that has, I would say, split decision on so we'll see how we get on with Mars Attacks in the next episode.
It's another farce, though.
It is, and yeah, I'm going to leave my opinions of it for now, but we'll get into it because it is an interesting one. But for now, Julian, thank you very much as always. It's been a treat.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah,
be excellent to each other.
That's it. Everyone out there, that's it. Be excellent to each other. It's quite hard to ask for that in this day and age. So just consider it when you're out and about. But yeah,
be human to each other would be a wonderful thing if people did.
Yeah, just be nice. Just for once. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next episode.